Hello and welcome to the Embrace Your Destiny podcast. My name is Sandra Dawes and I'm your host. And if you're new to the podcast, the Embrace Your Destiny podcast is all about sharing the journey of women who have been through a challenging time in their life, and they offer advice for anybody who may be going through something similar in their own life, as well as sharing the biggest lessons they've learned throughout that journey. And today, my guest is Kole Whitty, and Kole is a biointegration specialist and somatic stress, tension, trauma release expert. Every body has a unique language that, when integrated, becomes an instinctual superpower. Kole works closely with her husband, Ta, and together they have helped hundreds of people to integrate their wellness practice and understand how their subconscious thoughts and patterns become physical manifestations. They know that by feeling your way through into flow, using the nervous system to discharge constricting emotions and tap into the power of their body intelligence brings physical and emotional freedom. Her experience spans over 17 years of professional speaking after a coma from a drug overdose, all over major television networks, the Untitled Nations, and universities. 5 years as a personal trainer, fitness instructor, and wellness coach. Even winning Instructor of the Year with the largest fitness company in the U.S., Beachbody, and 10 years in shamanic plant medicines and Andean traditions. So welcome, Kole.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here and just to chat.
Yeah, so why don't we just dive in and get started with the journey you want to share with us today?
Sure. I mean, it's been a journey. For 35, I've had a few lives. So my husband actually calls me Cole Gump, because it's like I go for a run and next thing you know, I'm like talking to the president and, getting kicked in the face by a horse. Like there's just these random acts throughout my life. And I think I did have a traumatic childhood or some traumatic events that caused me to be a pretty challenging teenager. So I got into abusing substances, and pretty textbook, right? When you look at childhood trauma, what that evolves into. So that led to a coma from a drug overdose when I was 17. And I was dropped off at an emergency room, unconscious and as a Jane Doe. At that point, I wasn't living at home. I'd moved out, got a roommate, got an apartment, dropped out of school, and was trying to be an adult, I guess, And so my parents didn't have any reason to question why I wasn't home. And through that process, that was the beginning of a turning point, but the coma itself wasn't like a wake-up call. What it was it really was showing me that I did not care if I lived or died. And in fact, I had no desire to live. And, suicidal thoughts, all of that was very present most of my life, actually. So through this process, though, my younger sister started getting into abusing drugs. And my turning point was seeing her and saying, I don't want her to be like me. She's talented. She had always gotten good grades. She was beautiful. I felt like she was so many things I wasn't. And yet I knew the only way I was going to be able to save her was to save myself. That whole idea.
Right. You had to lead by example.
And so I kind of started taking those steps for both of us, starting by telling my parents the truth. And then I needed to create something to hold on to keep me from going back into that lifestyle. And I knew that. So I went and participated in the Miss Utah teen pageant because why can't I think of the word right now? It's so funny. The platform was substance abuse or club drug abuse education in the state of Utah. So I said, well, if anyone is going to educate the youth of Utah, it should be me. And the judges agreed. And so I won Miss Utah Teen, competed at Miss Teen USA. I was never a pageant type girl, mind you, was very much one of the loner outsider bad kids labeled where I lived. However, this was the beginning of sharing my story. And after a few years of doing it and traveling all over the world, I helped the United States in educating about the soldiers. We have a huge problem overseas with addiction and soldiers in particular in like the Middle East or countries where there's a lot of opiate use. So I would speak and, I did a lot of talk shows and all that. But what I realized was that I was trying to make up for everything I felt I'd ever done wrong. I was trying to save my soul in some kind of way, and it didn't feel good. And I was connecting people in despair and sadness. I mean, I'd get 200 plus emails every day, and I'd email every single one back. And those were after they were filtered through someone because, I'd get weird stuff.
Of course.
Of course. And this was before, social media. Thank goodness, to be honest with you, because I can't imagine.
Right. Could you imagine now?
I mean, I spoke at hundreds of schools in the United States too. So I can't imagine, what else that would have been. And so I realized that I still had a lot of work to do. And I moved to New York City at 19 years old by myself. I got signed to a management company, thought, oh, this is it. My life is going to turn around. I'm going to be the next, pop star. And then I got signed to Britney Spears' manager's assistant. So I thought for sure that, all my worries were over. I was going to be a huge sensation musician. I'd always been a musician. And then that fell apart, right? The plan and what seemed like divine timing or some gift from God or the universe or whatever you identify with was a slap across the face. And so I didn't know what I was going to do. So through this process, I decided to take a step back, actually, from speaking for a few years, because I realized the energy I was coming to it with was not one really of inspiration. And it was connecting me and almost like holding me in a stuck pattern of who I used to be and wasn't leaving the space for me to grow into who I envision or imagine myself to be. So, I stepped away from it. I'd always been a rebellious kid. So I thought, well, maybe my parents are right. Maybe I need to just settle down, get married, do that whole thing. So I moved back to Utah after a few years in New York, 4 or 5 years, and got married the, Mormon religious guy that my parents loved and thought, maybe I've been doing it wrong. Needless to say, their way didn't work either. So
right.
after a couple years in that marriage and realizing like, wow, you actually can't marry because it looks good on paper. That doesn't work either. So that's when I really started this personal journey for myself. And it came to a head when at 26, I had hypothyroidism and endometriosis, ovarian torsions, fibromyalgia, arthritis in my knees, scoliosis in my back. I mean, I was always in pain. I was also drinking wine, large amounts. We're not talking about a glass after work. We're talking about one of those huge magnum bottles.
Right. So now you're self-medicating in a different way
Totally.
than you were.
And, then I couldn't sleep at night so I would take Andean to go to sleep, caffeine to wake up, and then eating toxic foods. So my body was showing the patterns of all these things, the emotional pain that I had never dealt with, the physical disruption of inflammation, from alcohol, from whatever. And though it wasn't a quote unquote problem, I was quite functional. I wouldn't drink and drive. I wouldn't, be throwing up or anything like that. So I saw it as quite functional, had a great job. And my body was not functional. My life was not functional. I was not in a place that I felt was even sustainable. So that started my real journey into what I do now with this wellness space and helping people to translate the unique language their body speaks. Because the body actually has all the truth that me as a practitioner needs to get to what's the hurt. I can identify the symptoms or the person has, but let's talk about where is the source. And it could be food related. I've got a wellness background. I've got all of that training as well. But it always is deeper than that. What's the emotional pain? What is the construct, conditioning, or situation that has certain beliefs ingrained in a person to think they're either not valued, not heard, not significant, not worthy, whatever? When you dig deep enough, it always comes down to these very, very few things that a person's experiencing. So that really led us into what I do now.
Kole, what would you say is the biggest lesson that you've learned through this piece of your journey?
The biggest piece for me is that if there is pain in the body, if there is medical conditions, that there is maybe emotion isn't the whole source, but it does contribute to maybe outbreaks or, if something becomes active. And that for me, the deepest source was shame and guilt and my inability to forgive myself or to have compassion for myself. So it was really looking at how I internalize my experience of myself.
That self-awareness, though, is so huge, right? Because once you start to really learn about yourself and where at the root of those problems, you can start to shift things in a positive way.
Totally. Something I developed for myself and now I use it with clients too is called the 3 Ps. And it's pause, physical scan, and then proceed. If you can start with a pause when you're feeling that trigger or that reaction coming up for whatever, a conversation with a family member, a boss coming at you, whatever. If you can pause first and feel into your body, that physical scan, where am I feeling or where might some sensation be coming from? Because if you feel a tightness in your throat, if you feel a heaviness in your chest, just acknowledging that can actually let you know what's going on in your nervous system and that you're getting heightened. And if you're getting heightened, what happens is you flip into something called the sympathetic nervous system and you can't mentate clearly, which means our brain's amazing and incredible. But what it does, if when the front of the brain shuts off, when it gets heightened, then it's going to pull up out of the Rolodex, whatever, or it's going to shut down. And we call that freeze. So there's fight or flight or freeze. So if you pause first, notice if you're getting heightened. 2, physical scan, where am I at in my sensation? This helps you track in the future as well. Then from there, you can proceed with how you want to respond to what you're experiencing in the current situation. Because when you do have that self-awareness and as you develop it, that process enables you to choose differently so that if you are with your partner or a spouse or a friend and something they said that actually has nothing to do with your interaction together, it's some trigger to the past, you can choose just by pausing to respond differently this time because you already know. You don't want to come at them, or go for them because it's not them, right? This is an old wound.
It never is. Yeah.
When you're heightened like that, it does not have to do with the current situation, at least unless it's an extreme situation.
Yeah. I find that when you can take that pause and not have those knee-jerk reactions, that it's a relationship saver, it's a mental health saver. Like it's so important, but I feel like it's an art form that you have to really practice that, because I think that for many of us, the knee-jerk reaction is the go-to, right? Because we haven't taken the time to develop that self-awareness. And so we're getting triggered all the time, but we're not taking that pause to be like, hang on, whenever this is said to me, whenever this happens, I seem to react in the same way, and kind of cut that cycle and do something different.
I mean, that's what empowerment is. Actually, empowerment is not coming for someone, screaming them out, whatever. That might show that you have power. The thing is, though, when you're talking about empowerment, if someone can get you that riled up, they're actually the one in control.
Absolutely.
And the more heightened you get, you can't actually mentate clearly. So even if you do want to argue your point or communicate it, the more elevated you get makes you unable to, because you're going to either shift into old patterns or you're just going to shut down. You'll get emotionally flooded. You can't mentate clearly. The prefrontal cortex shuts down and that's it. And then you're going to stew about it for days what you wish you would have said, or why couldn't I say it,
Yeah. And spend way too much time in your head.
That is a tricky place, that head.
Yeah, it's almost like a vortex. It can kind of swallow you whole if you allow it to.
No doubt. I mean, that if I could be paid for the amount of hours spun in my head over the same topic from different angles and the what ifs and I mean, I would, yeah, the gates wouldn't have anything on me. We'll just say that.
Right. Yeah, it is such a challenge though, but I feel like once you start to do the work and once you really develop that awareness, it is so freeing.
Oh man, no question. Just by, first of all, time's going to pass anyway. If you aren't where you want to be, I always like to look at it like, okay, what in my life is putting me into alignment of what I see and what I desire, and what's taking me out of it? I don't classify things as right or wrong. Does this align me with what I want? So if I'm looking at, say, a big purchase, now, if my long term goal is to, say, buy a house, that purchase could keep me from obtaining that goal. So it's not that buying, say, an expensive car is wrong. It's like what's actually going to align you with this person you would like to be or envision to be. And it's the same with smoking, drinking, whatever. Like when I smoked hardcore for 16 years. When I stopped smoking, it wasn't, I'm going to quit because it's bad for you. I was always like, I don't feel like quitting. And when I feel like quitting, I will. And then I realized it wasn't about quitting. As I got more into wellness, it became an oxymoron. What's the good of eating all these organic foods and working out every day and smoking every day?
Right. Sabotaging it with the smoking. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was just, I realized as I set more fitness goals, I couldn't obtain them because my lung capacity. Because I could not smoke for weeks at a time, later. We'll say in the last 6-7 years, it shifted. So I could go days, weeks, or if I got sick, I could stop cold turkey because I knew I wasn't going to do it, say, with bronchitis.
Right.
So that's also the part of me that knew I wasn't addicted to the chemical element of it. It was the routine. So I just started crowding out the routines that weren't aligning me with feeling more expansive, being able to climb, the master mountain at Machu Picchu, whatever. So instead of thinking I'm going to quit and cut it out of my life, I just kind of crowded it out. Like there wasn't enough room for it anymore.
Right, because you created more positive habits that you didn't. Yeah.
So then there was never a deficit. And I knew I could have a cigarette at any time if I wanted to. And there have been times that I have. And that always came without any judgment as well. So because there wasn't the shame and guilt spiral, I had done the work and showing up and knowing that everything's a choice. I'm not a victim to my choices. I'm not a victim ever. I may have been victimized in moments, but I have not, the whole idea of victim is that you're holding it in a current pattern, right? As a verb, like in the moment of now.
Yes.
And the same with survivor. First I was a victim. And I put a book out on Amazon called Someone Save Me. I would say if you were going to compare it to a literary work, you couldn't because it's terrible. I wrote it. I edited it. I didn't go to high school or graduate from high school. I didn't learn the fundamentals of the English language, and it didn't matter at that stage. That's not what I was about. What I realized, though, through that process and in reading it now, I'm so grateful I never took it down off of Amazon because it speaks to the growth that I've experienced in the last 9 years. Because that book was written by a victim. But then after that book, I stepped into a survivor mentality, right? Wow, I'm a survivor. I've overcome so many things because the addiction, the coma, all that was nothing in the span of what was actually traumatizing for me. I don't remember the coma, so that wasn't traumatizing for me at all. That's a whole other story in itself. Then the pattern of being stuck in a survivor mentality because I got significance and love from being a survivor of all these like heinous and horrific events in my life. So letting go of that as well, realizing as I started to write a new version of my book, I was writing it as a survivor for significance and love. And to be like, oh, I've come through so much. And everyone's like, oh, you're so awesome, Kole. You've done so well for yourself. That's nice. But then that can become addictive because then it's like, oh, well, I'm grateful that everything that happened to me happened because it's made me a better person. Yeah, I mean, that's true. And there's also this idea that being a survivor, oh, my chihuahua just shook. Hi, baby. I always have my 4-pound chihuahua, Henry, sitting with me. And so stepping out of the survivor mentality has been the last 5 years, a process. But I'd say I've been very much out of it for the last 3. And recognizing that I don't need my weapons anymore. A survivor still might need their weapons, their tools, their things to protect themselves. Now it's like this thriving or warrior mentality, but more like, I don't know, a ninja maybe, right? Where I don't have to carry a lot of weapons. I don't even need armor. I now know that I've trained and navigated so many things in my life that if I need to call on those weapons, I can, but I don't need to carry them. And they don't need to be presented first. I can use my communication skills I've developed first. I can use
Right.
some other compassion and love as tools first before I have to pull out weapons. Trust and believe. I'll pull out the weapons if I need to, but those don't come out first. And that's the power of the pause, then the physical scan, and the proceed is to not go to the weapons first, especially on people you love.
Right, because now you're living a more proactive life as opposed to a reactive one.
Totally. I have far more say in what happens in my life now because someone can't get me all riled up easily. So I'm not giving my power away. I'm not giving my energy away without some serious work on the other person's part.
Yeah, I think that's so huge. And as you were talking, it reminded me, for some reason, of this Wayne Dyer quote where he talks about when you label me, you negate me. And I feel like these labels of, the victim or the survivor, because you're so much more than that. There's so much more to each of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
That when we identify as one particular thing, then it sort of negates all these other elements and all these other components that make us us.
Totally. You can attach for moments to identity. And like you said, that's not who you are, right? That's kind of like what you are or where you are in
or
a
where
given
you've
moment.
been. Yeah.
Totally. And it's recognizing that the longer you cling to something, then I feel like that's when life comes to show you another version. And if you're clinging too tightly to that identity, it can be very painful.
Right, because it's almost like the universe is like, oh, so you think you're done now, right?
Right.
That this label is the final destination.
Cute.
And it's like, you're not. There's so much more left to go. So yeah, it's just that little shake or maybe a major shake, depending on how much waking up we need to do.
Yeah, and becoming more present just means recognizing that that's happening if it happens. And just saying, all right, I guess we're going for this ride because I'm human. I got on my soapbox a little bit, thinking I don't have any problems anymore and I'm great. And then having my booty handed to me or a 2x4 to the face of, that's cute. That's nice, Kole, that you think that you're so wonderful.
Yeah. It looks like you're getting a little bit too comfortable right now. Yeah. Hang on a second.
Yeah, let's take you for a little ride to remember that it can change in an instant.
Seriously. Kole, what advice would you give to somebody who's going through something similar in their own life, where they're struggling because whether they have issues with feeling worthy, that they have issues where they're holding on to guilt for things that have happened in the past that they haven't been able to let go of?
Sure.
What advice would you offer?
With the age of the internet, the way that it is now, you can find whatever you need for the stage you're in right now for free. It takes more research. It takes more, time perhaps. And at the same time, it's like the thing that has helped me the most is finding people that I could really follow that had been on a similar path, whether it was a similar medical condition that they stopped subscribing to. The medical conditions I had, I don't even list them anymore because they haven't been active for years. I haven't been medicated for years. So I no longer even identify with them. So in a process, is there someone out there? And trust me, these days there is. If you Google, you will find your answers, whether it's for PCOS, hypothyroidism, overflexible joints. Someone is a few steps ahead of you in the process. And being able to see yourself in someone else is part of, as humans, what gives us hope. Oh, if they did it, then I can. Or listening to a podcast like yours and saying, like, wow, maybe I didn't go through what that person has, but I can see everything they've gone through. So I know I can. And then besides that, it's trusting that the process is cyclical, that it is a process. It's not always in a linear straight line. In fact, it's never linear. And the number one thing that helped me the most in those first transitionary periods was changing my diet. Because by lowering the inflammation, I could think clearly. I didn't have as much pain in my joints, and that at least brought down that meter from like a 9 out of 10 every day or a 10 out of 10 down to a 6 or a 7. So I had more energy, I had more patience, I had more ability to see hope. So if you would have told me 10 years ago that I would ever achieve pain free, I couldn't have even conceived that. There's this saying, whatever your brain can conceive and believe, your mind can achieve, kind of a thing. I said it wrong, but you get the gist.
Yeah.
And we're limited by what we can conceive. So,
Yeah.
it's like start by getting yourself from a 10 to an 8 to a 6, a 6 to a 4, whatever you are, wherever you are in that process. Because time's going to move forward anyway, but 1 degree shift, one commitment to yourself and forgiveness for not doing it perfectly all the time. A year from now, the trajectory means you're in a completely different place. If you factor in one new habit a month or research one other part of your condition, medicine's changing all the time. My husband was supposed to be blind by now. And so he spent most of his 20s and 30s anticipating when he could not see the things he loves anymore.
Oh,
And
wow.
now not only did it stop, it has started to reverse because stress has a huge role on degenerative conditions. What's your beliefs around your condition? Have you really taken that badge someone gave you, whether it's that you're ADD, whether it's that you've got this medical condition? Have you decided that to be true and holding it in the present? Or is there other possibilities? Because there are miracles every day. And more people are willing to assume that something is wrong with them or they are innately broken than they are innately deserving of a miracle. So my advice, besides what I said already, if I was going to simplify it, is allow the space for you to be the miracle, for you to have these surprising turnarounds and these amazing stories, because it's happening to people every day and miracles come with effort, in my opinion.
Yeah. That's some great advice, because I think that's the issue for a lot of us, right? Is that limitation about what's possible. And so to have that perception that, you are limitless and that anything is possible is something that we have to train ourselves to do.
And you might have to change your environment a little. With the internet, you can do that.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you might live in an environment where everyone is holding you to that, and saying what you can and can't do and what you're worthy of. And just finding Facebook groups, that are aligned with people on the journey already, finding inspiration. Because if it's not in your direct environment, you need to find it so that your brain can start to conceive something else as possible. Until that happens, you're not going to be able to change much.
Yeah, having a strong support system is so important.
So important.
Kole, any last thoughts before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I think we actually covered a lot in such a short period of time.
We did.
It's just, I would say, especially if you were on a journey like I was and you're wanting to learn more about the mind-body connection and the impact of some of these subconscious thoughts, you can always hit me up, of course. And there's 2 books that I recommend highly. One is called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. The other is Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine. Those 2 books bring so much perspective and insight to childhood trauma or adverse childhood environments, to the health of us as adults. So that would be a beautiful place to start and bring perspective, if that's the journey you're on.
Awesome. So when you'll find links to that, the listeners, when you go back to the show notes, because I'll have links to those 2 books that Kole just mentioned. And there will also be links to connect with Kole, her website, social media handles, all that good stuff in the show notes as well. And so, Kole, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and your willingness to share your journey. And again, for the listeners, if you're in your car or at the gym or walking your dog, you can always come back to the show notes to learn more about Kole and where to find her, and learn more about all the amazing things that she's doing. And so until next week, have an awesome day, an awesome week, and take care.